Hello, my name is Sandy Adamitis, the social media director for the Page International Screenwriting Awards, and your host for the Writers Hangout, a podcast that celebrates the many stages of writing, from inspiration to the first draft, revising, getting a project made, and everything in between. We'll talk to the best and the brightest in the entertainment industry and create a space where you can hang out, learn from the pros, and have fun. Hey writers, I'm coming to you from the humid East Coast. And anyone who has ever listened to this podcast knows I'm obsessed with rain. And last night we had a huge thunderstorm and I slept through it. Didn't hear a thing. Maybe that was because of the red-eye flight I took, landed, dealt with a car rental nightmare, then a 3-hour drive to my sister's house. But who knows? Storm or no storms, we have part 4 and our last mini roundtable with 2 more Page Awards judges. As we continue our conversation on how they evaluate your screenplay, next week, to wrap up this series, we'll be talking to Kristen O'Verne, the founder and executive director of the Page International Screenwriting Awards. Meanwhile, let's get started with this terrific interview I think you are really going to enjoy. Karen Craig is a professional screenwriter and script doctor whose credits include such films as American Psycho 2, starring Mila Kunis and William Shatner, and Forbidden Secrets, starring Kristy Swanson. Karen has served as a judge for the Page Awards for the past 12 years, reviewing both thriller horror scripts and family films. Scott Barkan is a professional screenwriter with several produced films and sold scripts to his name. He has worked with Blumhouse and Lionsgate and is repped by Mainstay Entertainment and CAA. Scott is also a university professor teaching music and communications. As a Page judge, he primarily reads action-adventure, thriller horrors, and science fiction. Let's get started. Karen Craig and Scott Barkan, thanks for joining us on the Writers Hangout.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, all is well. Thank you.
Hey, before we start, would you like to do a round of Would You Rather?
Sure.
I'm taking those as a yes. Karen, you're up first.
Oh, no.
Would you rather be forced to sing along or dance to every single song you hear?
Oh, I would sooner dance. I can't sing at all. You don't want me singing, trust me.
Scott, would you rather spend a week in the forest or a night in a real haunted house?
Oh, definitely a night in a real haunted house.
Yeah.
I'm desperate to spend a night in a real haunted house.
Karen, would you rather be forced to live the same day over and over again for a full year or take 3 years off of the end of your life? That's a thinker.
Oh, no. I don't know. I think same day.
Okay.
I want to live for a long time. I'm good with that.
I respect that. Scott, would you rather sleep in a doghouse or let stray dogs sleep in your bed?
Oh, I would sleep in the doghouse. Yeah. These are easy.
Okay.
These are easy.
This piece of the puzzle. Karen, would you rather eat the same thing for every meal for a year or be able to eat whatever you wanted, but only once every 3 days?
Well, I think everything I want.
Yeah.
Every 3 days, I'm good with that.
Scott, would you rather work for Michael Scott or Mr. Burns?
That is a tough one.
You would work in a nuclear power plant, though, right?
Yeah.
You work for Burns.
The office environment. I guess I would work for Michael Scott. That seems a bit more fun.
Yes, I agree. Karen, would you rather live through an episode of Orange is the New Black or Black Mirror?
Black Mirror.
Yeah, something really cool could happen.
Right?
Scott, would you rather lose your keys or your phone?
My keys. definitely.
Karen, would you rather be criticized or ignored?
Ignored.
Yeah, I think so too.
Right.
And this is for both of you. Scott, you go first. Would you rather read the book or watch the movie?
Of course, I'd rather watch the movie.
Karen?
Watch the movie.
There you go.
There's something about the atmosphere. Yeah.
Yes. Represent.
Right.
Yes. Okay, the first question is one that we've been asking all the judges. As a judge for the Page Awards, we ask you to evaluate a script based on 10 elements equally: premise/concept, presentation, structure, plot, pacing, characters, dialogue, theme, style/tone, and commercial potential. Karen, what's the first thing you look for when you start reading a new script?
It's got to be, I like tone and atmosphere. That always grabs me at the very beginning. It's got to be that strong first couple lines. But then it's the opening as a total. It's got to have good character, plot, everything. But yeah, it's always the atmosphere.
Atmosphere.
I'm a sucker
cool.
for atmosphere.
How about you, Scott?
I think the things that I look for are really things that I can't help but notice, like the concept and the presentation, these things that are just sort of right in my face, that when I'm opening up the script, I see the log line, I see what the script looks like, and I can't help but create some form of initial feeling about this writer based on how those things are coming at me, So
right.
It's sort of unavoidable to be like, this concept is telegraphing something, the way the log line is written is telegraphing something, the way the formatting is done is telegraphing something. So just immediately I've got some kind of impression about their professionalism or where this writer's head is at, and that sort of frames my experience.
Karen, what do you think is the most critical element of a great screenplay?
I think it's characters, because we're on their journey and we're going through the script. I want to know their emotional depth. I want to go and see what excites them. I want to be emotionally invested in that. If I'm emotionally invested, I will follow that script all the way through to the last page, and I'll think about them long after.
Oh, that's great. Scott?
For me, I think the most critical element is surprise. When you read as many scripts as I do, being surprised by the script is one of the only ways that it can sort of really get my attention. Even if the script has like a sort of straightforward premise that I've seen or characters that I've seen, but they can still surprise me in how they go about telling the story or fleshing out those characters that they're populating the story with, then that's when I start to lean in, but when it's all sort of stuff I've seen before, it almost doesn't matter how well you do, sort of follow the screenwriting doctrine in terms of execution and stuff. It sort of leaves me just shrugging my shoulders at the end of it,
When you read that surprising thing on the page, do you just kind of look up to the sky and just go, yes?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the thing that I'm like, thank God this writer is thinking, a few steps ahead of me. Like I said, when you read a premise, it sort of gives you some ideas about, okay, this is sort of the likely way for whatever this idea is to go. And then when it doesn't go down that road, then I'm like, okay, now you've got my attention, because you're not doing the same thing that of the last 100 scripts in this genre that I read,
Yes. Karen, there's a saying in the industry that a good beginning keeps you reading, as you just stated, but a strong ending makes or breaks your screenplay. What does a writer need to do to nail a strong finish for you?
For me, it's similar to what Scott just said. It's a twist on the expectation. We'll read a retread of a premise that's been done to death. But if it's made different, if it's unique, if it takes me to places that I don't expect, I am there for it. So for me, it all comes down to being able to deliver that twist on expectation.
Great. And Scott?
Yeah, it's funny. I was going to sort of say something to what Karen said last in the last question, which is for me, the start of the script is where I really want to see the clear character and see that they're in a clearly dramatic situation with sort of understandable goals and wants. So when I don't know exactly who the story is about or why any of this matters to them, then it becomes really hard to invest, and get through the whole script. And then as for the ending, I think I feel similarly. It should sort of reflect the beginning, but shouldn't be obvious from the beginning. There's that phrase, surprising but inevitable, that about the ending that I think is sort of right on the money. It shouldn't totally reinvent, like where we're landing in a way that feels out of place. But, and there should be a certain inevitability in how the story can sort of only go to one place, but somehow that place is still surprising us.
I know you have such mad respect when that works out in a script.
Yeah. And yet it feels so right. Like that's the sort of the emotion.
And it gives you such a good feeling. You're so happy for the writer. That they did this. Karen, you read a lot of family films for the content. What makes a good family film?
For me, it's always if it resonates with all audiences and it's got an emotional heart of some sort. It doesn't matter if it's a comedy or a drama, it's got to have heart to it. I also love when it's a fun ride or a journey, and then it's got to entertain me from start to finish. Even if it's a drama, it's got to be entertaining, and regardless of the subgenre, it's got to take me to places.
I love that you said heart, which is important for every movie, but you can have a group of teenagers just saying the funniest, wittiest, snappiest lines. But if there's no heart,
sure.
Yeah, my favorite comes to mind, Tina Fey's movie with
Mean Girls.
Mean Girls, yes.
Mean Girls had heart,
It did.
Yeah.
And very, very funny lines. Does besides heart, Karen, does it have to have a message for a family film? I mean, should it hit you over the head that this is about a family is a family no matter what?
No. In fact, I don't like it when I get hit over the head. Honestly, a good film should have a theme, but a theme is different than a message. And a theme is more universal. Like we get a universal theme like good versus evil or about love or justice. But a message is more designed towards characters and the characters of that film and that dynamic and that situation. So that's not going to apply to everyone because everyone's not going to find themselves in that same situation. And sometimes people tend to write their message too strongly. So I personally am not drawn to that, but I don't feel like you need a message, but you do need a theme to be a good script. That makes sense.
Yeah, you could have just said, no, you don't have to have a message, but you're right. Definitely a theme. Yeah. What issues do you commonly run across? And do you have any suggestions for our writers out there how they can avoid those problems when writing a family film?
Sure. For me, it's emotional stakes is a really big one. They're often forgotten. So you can have like a tragic opening or a character that's gone through a traumatic experience or lost a parent, but then that's never considered later on in the script at a highly crucial point. A lot of times they'll be forgotten and skipped just to do the plot, to move it forward. And that's a shame because you want the depth of characters. I want to know that these characters are real because we've invested in them. Yeah. And something else is logic. Logic is another thing, regardless of whether you're writing something sci-fi, something animated, comedic, drama, your logic needs to track throughout and you can't skip certain logic moments and make us pretend we didn't read that later or something that built up to it just to get something in.
Meaning there is a character in the beginning of your family film who is afraid of heights. Yeah. And then towards the end, they're not, but you haven't earned it.
Yes.
Right. Oh, okay. Yes. Yeah.
So everything has to be honestly earned throughout. Because if you don't, then you spring it on us, then we're going to be, well, that's out of character for that character.
Right.
They spent all this time us investing in and believing what their journey is. And you switched it.
And if a writer gets that great idea, they should just go back and maybe work
just
it
edit.
In. Just edit. Well, okay.
I find that when I write, and it's different for every writer, but I will go back for a logic pass on a draft. And I'll go back for an emotional pass on a draft. And sometimes it's just as simple as shading a piece of dialogue in certain places. We're setting something up early in the script for the later payoff later. So people don't go, well, that came out of nowhere. And it doesn't have to hit you over the head, the setup, but it just has to be nuanced in so that you get it later.
I really like that because a writer might think, okay, I've edited, I've looked for typos. I don't need to do other passes, but a logic pass, an emotion pass, that's very helpful.
Yeah,
Scott,
no
what about action adventure scripts, which you read for the Page Awards? What makes a script in this genre really stand out from the pack?
You know, I think I'll probably wind up sounding like a broken record by the end of this podcast, but the things that stand out to me are just sort of unique and fun premises. You know, the action, adventure, and thriller movies are sort of constantly being made, you know, and so our challenge as writers is how do we separate our scripts from that pack? And it comes down to sort of surprise. What is the surprising element that you're adding to this that isn't just, you know, oh, the hitman who is getting revenge or whatever that is. You know, if we look at a movie in that mold, like John Wick, for example, you know, there's lots of surprising elements that elevate it sort of beyond just the sort of your first basic impulse. You know, one is about his dog, you know, it's revenge over a dog, which is surprising and fresh, but also sort of tugs at our heartstrings in a way that these movies don't usually, you know, or then there's, you know, it has a very unique universe. There's the Continental Hotel and the coin, like monetary system that all these assassins have, and all of that stuff, it sort of surprises and delights us, and it elevates things beyond the sort of basic trappings that we see all the time in these movies where it's sort of just like a tough guy in a bad situation, you know?
Thank you for that, Scott. What issues do you most commonly run across? And do you have any suggestions for writers on how they can avoid those problems? I guess what I'm saying is you're right. We do see the same things over and over. You would call those cliches. Yeah. And any suggestions as how not to do that?
Well, the first thing I think you need to do is, you know, take a real honest assessment of what your premise is. I think, you know, one thing that a lot of writers probably don't spend enough time on is deciding what they are actually going to invest their time into writing. You know, they'll come up with a premise that is sort of good enough, you know, and then just say, okay, I'm going to do it. And maybe they'll do a good job. But if at that core stage, it is sort of a cliched premise, then you're sort of sunk before you've begun, you know? So I think taking that honest assessment of like, okay, what am I planning to write? What are the movies that it looks like? And is it just redoing those things that we've seen? And if it is, how can I sort of elevate it? You know, I like to call this idea sort of the +1 on an idea. So if you have a home invasion thriller that's just about a bunch of guys breaking into a house and then it goes bad, that's like the most generic version. So what's something you can add to that? You know, like they're breaking, you know, the real obvious version is they're breaking into a house and they don't know it's a superhero's house or something like that.
Oh,
and
right.
Then suddenly,
or there's a panic room.
Yeah. A panic room is a great example of that. You know, that's just a +1, an element that is not sort of assumed from the foundation of the premise. It's like, oh, we're adding this in, and that's going to create a whole bunch of unique, fun opportunities that is going to make this script different from all the other home invasion thrillers that are out there. Just to cite one sort of subgenre as an example. You know? So that honest assessment and then making that clear, concerted attempt to say, what can I do that is going to push this into some new territory is really important.
Oh, I really like that. So you don't necessarily have to just shy away completely if it's been done before, but if you put your touch on it and give us a twist or a surprise, go for it.
Yeah, exactly. You know, obviously the people think everything's been done, and to a certain extent, that's sort of true. But when we start to sort of mash things together or put unlikely characters in unlikely situations, you can have elements that have been done before, but find, unique ways into them that will give your script the sort of freshness that it needs to sort of stand up and say, hey, look at me, as opposed to all these other ones that are in your pile,
Right. Erin,
yes.
What would you say to a screenwriter who knows they wrote an excellent script, but it doesn't win or place in any competition?
Well, number one, don't give up. Because just because you didn't place or win does not mean it's a bad script. It does not mean you're a bad writer. You just have to keep trying and just resubmit, go out further with it. Or at the same time, as that's out, write something new. Invest in another script. Because who knows, maybe that one will place or sell and get you an agent or get you a manager or find a producer. That could turn your other script into a valuable commodity. So you have to keep going forward. Never stop, but keep going forward.
That's wonderful. How about you, Scott?
I think the hard thing for a lot of writers to swallow is that a lot of people write excellent scripts. I think maybe a misconception is that excellence isn't exactly what it takes to win. And obviously you have to have a certain level of excellence in terms of the nuts and bolts and the story structure, but there has to be something sort of inspired or unique to your own voice, and I think that's a mistake a lot of people make is they'd say, I'm looking at my script and I've followed all the, the save the cat beats or whatever all those things are. And by all these objective measures, this is a great script. But when you get so wrapped up in that kind of thinking, you wind up with something that might be very good on a technical level, or objectively, yes, you're sort of delivering a script that feels professional in a way, but there's a huge gulf sort of between that, which might be a really excellently crafted script, and something that is truly, great and inspired. And most scripts sort of die in that valley between those things, where you sort of get up to this level of execution where you feel like I've read a lot of scripts, I've studied all the books, and I'm doing what they say. But there's a sort of element of true personality or humanity or something that is missing. And I think I would tell people you've got to get a little bit more of yourself and a little bit more of that idiosyncrasy of who you are and what makes this script special, and that's sort of how to get it to stand up. And if you're feeling like your script is really good, but people aren't latching onto it for whatever reason, I think that's sort of the way to go, is take a step back and say, well, where is the elements of who I am as a writer in this script, and where's that distinction happening where no one else could have written this?
That was really great. I could picture the writer. I saw a writer at a desk being frustrated and flipping through their script. You drew such a great picture. I also like what you said. I think you were saying something like take a step back. If that means maybe putting your script in a drawer for 2 weeks. Is that what you mean by step back? Or?
Well, I mean, it depends. At any point in the process, I think, like I was saying earlier, about choosing your idea, or when you're looking at a draft that is already completed, I think one thing that's really easy for writers to do is just sort of convince themselves that something is good enough, and when I say taking a step back, I mean, really try and give yourself a truly honest assessment of your own work, which is very, very, very difficult to do, I acknowledge. And then seeing where are the parts where it feels like you're going through the motions, and where are the parts where it feels like, yes, in this one scene, I really tapped into something that I was so passionate about, and my own personal voice really came across on the page. And so that scene is like the scene that you want to model for your whole script. And then maybe not every scene in the script is achieving that, and so you want to find those moments and find those elements where your script, you can truly say, is making an argument for its own existence because you're the writer of it and you're bringing that sort of special element. And I think that's how you wind up standing out amongst all the other people who are content to sit back and say, it's good enough. It's my version of Mission Impossible, and it does everything that Mission Impossible does in the same ways. And I did it, and it is successful in doing that, and that's enough. And the truth is, it's not enough, which is a hard truth to swallow.
Yeah, it sounds like you could wrap in what Karen was saying earlier about you could do an emotional pass, you could do a logic pass, and then you can do a where am I in this script pass.
Absolutely.
You guys, I'm telling you, what great pointers and advice. This has just been great. My last question for you, is there any special advice we haven't already covered here that you'd like to offer up to the writers out there?
I think just keep writing, because it gets very disheartening. Writing is something you do alone. So you sit in your little room or wherever it is, and nobody else is there, and you have to cheer yourself on. And sometimes it can be disheartening. But if it's what you love, keep doing it. And you have to. If you want to pursue a career, you always have to be writing. So write one script, then go on to the next. And you're going to be doing this ideally for years and years and years.
Yeah, when you start out, you waste so much daylight trying to get characters in and out of a room. That's overwhelming, just to learn how to just simply do that, the technicalities, and you get better.
You do. With every script, every time you write anything.
How about you, Scott? Any specific advice we haven't covered?
Well, I would definitely agree that it's a long game. And I think a lot of writers make the mistake of, when they're just starting out, holding themselves to the standard of great movies that they've seen in their lives and thinking, why can't I do that? Well, it's like anything. If people wouldn't assume, if you're trying to learn the violin, that you could just pick it up and do it immediately. If you want to compete with the masters, you've got to dedicate your life to it, And so I think that's something that people should try and just cut themselves a little slack on, especially when you're in the beginning, and just write as much as you can, make as much output as you can. And then, like, as I was saying, honestly assess and take the feedback that you're getting really seriously and say, okay, where are people saying my scripts are suffering? If I ask 10 people and 6 of them say, well, I think it's a little boring, then you got to take that seriously. And
that's it. They're done. They're out. They're gone.
But that doesn't mean there's nothing good about it. It means, okay, you figure out where your strengths are, where your weaknesses are. And with every new script, continue to say, okay, well, my last script, everyone agreed, was a little boring. So how can I fix that in this next draft? And really focus your intent and be honest with yourself about where you're at and what you're actually doing to improve. And that's over time. And it is going to take a long time, how you get to the point where you can be executing things on a professional level and finding your own unique voice and way of approaching stories that have probably been told, 1,000 times already.
Right. I'm not sure. I think it was Anne Lamont or someone else, just something I randomly read once, that someone wanted to be a writer, wanted to write screenplays, didn't know where to start. So they would just take a script and retype it. So they can get the feeling of where things belong and how it works. And it sounds like a waste of time, but I always thought that would be good, that you'd have in your hands something that was so great and you're typing it and you would learn from it.
I think it's a great exercise. And I've definitely heard of people doing this. Like, what's a movie that you love? Without looking at the script, take a scene, what's your favorite scene? And just write it yourself and see what it looks like. And then you open up the script and say, okay, this was my version of the scene. And then look how they wrote the scene. And obviously the dialogue might be the same or whatever, but you're going to see the way they approached, handling the descriptions and the entrances and the exits and all those things, and learn from doing that. Or trying to, it would be a massive task to sort of rewrite a whole movie, but thinking about what's from memory, my favorite movie, if I was going to write out all the scenes and figure out those are the things that really stuck with me, and why did they stick with me, and things like that, I think. And then comparing back to the original movie, what are the things I forgot about? Maybe those things weren't so important, So I think exercises like that can be incredibly helpful for sure.
Yeah. Other thing.
Oh,
sorry.
Go ahead. Oh, go ahead, Karen.
No. I was just going to say that I want to give one other suggestion, that if you're having problems getting back into your script, if you've gone to do a rewrite or a pass on your script and you're no longer in that headspace, wherever you want to maybe place a scene or that, go back and rewrite the 5 pages before, and you will get back into the tone of your characters, the atmosphere, the pacing. Everything.
Oh,
it helps tremendously. And then it's a great jumping off point because you're back in your story.
Oh, I love that. A lot of our writers, they're from all over the world, and maybe they're their only person that they know that's writing. And there's a lot of knowledge on the internet, but sometimes I feel like it's for writers that have already gone down the path for a while. And there's so many people out there who just want to write. They just don't know how to even start.
Yeah, it's so true.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys so much for taking the time to spend with us. Is anyone on Twitter?
I'm on Twitter. I don't use it a ton, but you can reach me there if you want to. It's just at my name, Scott Barkan, SCOTTBARKAN.
Scott, we're gonna get you some friends on Twitter there. Go say hi to Scott on Twitter. Again, thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
That's a wrap for the Writers Hangout. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, like, and thrive. Till we get to hang out again, keep writing. The world needs your stories. The Writers Hangout is sponsored by the Page International Screenwriting Awards. Executive producer, Kristen O'Verne. Producers, Terry Sampson and Sandy Adamitis. Music by Ethan Stoller.